It's that time again.
Yep. We are Team Wester.
And you are the most important thing to us.
Team Wester.
Podcast. It's all about the team.
Hey everyone, Brad Gelber here, Team West Turf Shoot 2024. We're joined by a man who needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, thanks for having me.
So last year we did this same time around May, June, and I figured let's get back together, talk a little bit about football. The team seems to be a good time just because the offseason's here, draft's done with. So before we go to the future, looking back, obviously, I'm sure you've talked about it to death. I know you have. But kind of the way things ended last year, we've been in this similar situation, it feels like, a few times now versus the same team. Where do you get to a point when you're Buffalo where you kind of just have to take that next step, which we've talked, everyone's talked about, but how do you do it when it just seems to become almost this mental thing where it's a different sort of hurdle?
Well, I think that's, you alluded to some of it. You can't make it bigger than it is. You just got to play well on that day, the final game of the season. When you get to the divisional round or the championship round, you got to play well. And that's all there is to it. And it's not like, the Bills don't have any experience beating the Kansas City Chiefs. They do it, They've done it more than any other team. So with Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid. So they've got that under their belt. There's no reason to think there's some big, huge brick wall they can't break through. They just need to play well on that day. They've certainly been talented enough over the last 4 or 5 years to go to and win the Super Bowl. But there's, you've got to have the right recipe. You've got to have the right game plan. You've got to execute properly, and you've got to do it at a high level against a really good team. And, they haven't been able to do that yet, but I don't think their confidence should be shaken at all.
One question, I think that's unavoidable when you're talking about the Bills or the offseason is obviously the departure of Stefon Diggs. Another guy in the wide receiver core that's no longer here is Gabe Davis. So two, pretty significant pieces there for Josh Allen. We can get to in a moment kind of the guys that are coming in, but what do those losses mean to this team?
Well, there's certainly a void at the top of the wide receiver chart. I don't think that now, Steph Diggs was a tremendous player, no question. He put production on the board. He did a lot of good things. He was an elite player at his position, and that's hard to replace. But because there's a void, somebody's going to fill that void and do some things. Plus, it also clears the deck for people like Khalil Shakir and Dalton Kincaid and James Cook. Just because you had almost 200 targets that went out of the room with Gabe Davis and Steph Diggs doesn't mean you're going to throw it 200 and sometimes less. Sure. So there's going to be some players that come in and do some things. They're going to have different skill sets than Steph and Gabe, but I still think there's every reason to believe that this is a team that's going to be really potent offensively. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. We don't know exactly what the skill sets are going to look like with Khalil Shakir being the only guy in the wide receiver room who's caught a pass from Josh in a game. You don't know really what it's going to look like, but there's no reason to think they're going to fall off a cliff in their production.
So speaking of guys to fill that void, aside from Khalil Shakir, you have some new faces on the team. Obviously, Keon Coleman drafted as kind of the top pick in the past draft here. You have MVS, who's coming over from the Chiefs. You have a guy like Chase Claypool, who's just a flyer that was signed, who clearly has talent, just hasn't put it together. Kind of what are your thoughts on the new faces and the roles they might have?
Well, and Curtis Samuel is a guy, too, who's very fast and has some production, has been playing with what you would call less than elite quarterback play, and has a long list of guys he's played with. He's an intriguing prospect as well. And I think one of the things that we've seen over last year and this year was that the Bills, in their attempt to get different wide receivers on the field, they got bigger ones. Justin Shorter, Tyrell Shavers, Chase Claypool. There's a ton of guys, and they're all 6'3", 6'2", 6'3 plus, and over 200 pounds. They got bigger, they got more athletic, and I think they've got a diversified group in there that they're going to be able to pick and choose what they want. But no question that they made a concerted effort over the last 2 off seasons to get bigger at that position, and now with the decks cleared of Steph and Gabe, I don't think there's any question that that's going to be one of the things we notice about this wide receiver group.
So interestingly enough, though, when you spend high capital on a guy like Keon Coleman, right, and he comes in and you're seeing a departure of a name like Stefon Diggs, I think the tendency is to compare apples to apples, like Diggs is out, Coleman's in. How do you prevent that from feeling too much as a rookie, because that's going to be a lot to walk into for him?
I think the one thing that this coaching staff's been really good at is they get everything they earn. He doesn't have to come in and get plugged in at the number 1 or number 2 wide receiver spot. He's going to come in and work his way up the depth chart, and he'll get what he earns, so he'll know that he's capable of doing whatever they're asking him to do. And I think that's one of the crucial elements about a young player is if you don't just hand him a huge role in the offense or defense, but you let him earn it even from day one. Now, they can earn it fast, or it could take some time, but if you let the guy go at his own pace and pick up the offense, assimilate the offense, work into being a pro football player at his own pace, whether it be quick or a little bit slower, you have better results at the end, and you tend to get a better player in the end.
Something I talked to Reed Ferguson on the podcast about recently was just in terms of getting feedback from players during a draft, right? Like, does Brandon Beane pick up the phone and call anyone? And we've heard reports, Josh Allen liked this guy or that guy. Maybe we can ask him in a little while. But do you believe when you hear, like Keon Coleman was on Josh's short list? Is there a short list? Is Brandon Beane listening to Josh Allen, or is it more after the fact type of thing?
Probably a list that Brandon Beane has. And he probably gives that list to Josh, and Josh picks most of that list and say, yeah, any of these guys will do, or this guy's my guy, or whatever. That's probably the way it goes. Brandon says, listen, here's the guys we think we're going to have a shot at. Here's who we're interested in, and here's the reasons why. And Josh will go, easily go online and watch those guys and get to know them. And also, I doubt that this happened, but they could give him the recordings of the interviews they did personally with the guys. I mean, they could give Josh as much insight as they want. But they probably prepared Josh for a list of guys that they thought they might get, and Josh picked out a couple of favorites himself and said, either this guy or this guy or this guy. And that's probably the way that conversation went.
On the defensive side of the ball, we've talked about offense, but some pretty significant departures as well. So Trey White's no longer here. Jordan Poyer's no longer here. Micah Hyde's no longer here. We could go through kind of a list of pretty significant players. Obviously, Sean McDermott's bread and butter is the defense, so I don't know that people are necessarily worried about that because you'd hope the young guys can step up or new faces. How do you feel about the defense overall with some of those departures?
Well, I think there's one thing about it. They did lose a lot of experience and a lot of know-how that walked out the door, but they got in a lot of fresh legs and a lot of youth and a lot more athleticism at every level. So I think certainly there's a chance if things go as according to maybe the script, a young athletic defense like this is going to be kind of spectacular at times, but also awful at other times. But then as they get a few more reps under their belt, you can imagine that they're going to crescendo towards the end of the season, particularly with a defensive head coach like Sean McDermott. I think this is a team, a roster this year with the turnover they've had. You could see them getting off to maybe a little slower start than they have in the past, and particularly with the schedule that they're playing. And then at the end of the year, to kind of crescendo a little bit like they did last year. I don't anticipate them getting to the point where they got to win 5 straight to get in the playoffs. But it is a tough schedule, and there's every chance they may go through some growing pains early, and how fast they get out of those will decide, how far they go and how deep or what kind of seed they get in the playoffs.
In terms of defense, too, a guy they took, pretty early on was Cole Bishop. And if you watch kind of the behind-the-scenes access to, Brandon Beane, he was really excited when that pick landed with them. What are your thoughts on him early on and kind of maybe stepping into that absence of Hyde and Poyer in the backfield?
If he does, it'll be a real accomplishment. It's a hard position to just plop into unless there's completely void of anybody else. The safety position in the NFL, is the importance of it is from the neck up. You gotta know your light's got to be on. You got to recognize formations and motions and personnel groupings on the other side of the ball, let alone your own side. And then you also have to be a guy who can direct traffic. Say we're going to run this coverage against this with this front defensively, and do that. And he's got to communicate with the middle linebacker and the fronts, and the coverages have to coincide and have to match up. He's got to get a head start in some cases by formation and motion and personnel groupings as to what's coming. Really good ones are aware of all of that stuff, and that comes from study and reps and time. And, of course, Cole Bishop doesn't have that yet. He does have the athleticism. He does have the smarts to learn it. And he does have the chops to get there pretty quickly. He's going to get an opportunity, and that's going to be, what really sets his career up. But, like I said, it'll be a real feather in his cap if he can get on the field and be a day one starter in the NFL at that position because it's so cerebral.
Could you see a situation where perhaps as the Bills are making a push for the playoffs, someone like Micah Hyde does come back for like a playoff run? Because I know he basically said as much as he's not going to play for any other team if he does play. Is that something where he could wait a bit and see if they need his help later on?
Yeah, and I think it might come down to maybe some unfortunate injuries or something happens like that. You could see that easily. The way they did A.J. Klein last year as a linebacker, we came in midway through the season to give him a player who they can trust and who has some experience. And Micah, being at the point where he is, he certainly can get it done physically still. But the grind is what keeps you from being as effective as you can be. So, yeah, giving him like the last half of the season or the last quarter of the season plus the playoffs, if he can get in, would be a perfect scenario for him to come in and then also mentor a guy like Cole Bishop and DeMar, continue to mentor DeMar and those other guys in the room that say, listen, here's what we're thinking about, and when they do this, think about this, and just give that extra bit of credibility to what the coaching staff's telling you. So, yeah, I could foresee a scenario where Micah parachutes in the last part of the season to just be a guy who's, even if he doesn't get on the field, is just there as a parachute to keep something from going off the rails and putting a guy out there that you really have some trust in.
Last year I talked to you about the quarterback room as a whole, and I remember you saying it's important to surround Josh with guys he knows, trusts, and we talked about Kyle Allen coming in, who was a close friend of Josh Allen. So Kyle leaves, but now he gets back. Mitch Trubisky, another familiar face, good friend of Josh's. So at this point in Mitch's career, obviously it seems like he's probably this is the role he'll be in unless something happens. So what are your thoughts on Trubisky returning as kind of the backup to Josh Allen?
I think it'll be good for Josh. I mean, Trubisky will also will have a great frame of reference from where they were 2 years ago to come in and see what has changed and get a quick snapshot of that. And sometimes if you don't realize that this has taken place until somebody comes in and goes, hey, you used to do it this way and this way. There could be some of that where it could give a fresh set of eyes to Joe Brady and to Josh, something they could revert back to say, oh, yeah, I remember this. We were good at this. Maybe bring some stuff back or remember the thought process of how you evolved from it. Those are all important things to remember because when you're grinding away day after day, sometimes it's hard to step back and remember how you got to the point you're at and the reasons why. And a guy who was gone 2 years, for a whole year and then comes back can say, hey, well, why'd you change this? Why'd you change that? And it's a great way to assimilate and get a deeper understanding of where you're at now so you can move forward more effectively. Guys like that situation with Mitch Trubisky, now certainly on a personal level, Josh loves it because they're buddy. They hit it off really quick. But that insight and that frame of reference could also serve some benefit as well.
Joe Brady, a name I don't know anyone was surprised when he got the interim title removed and came in because it seemed like they did well under him towards the end of the season. What are your thoughts on him kind of taking over as the permanent offensive coordinator? And do you think this offense can kind of, despite the losses and new faces, find their groove this season under him?
Yeah, I think Joe's in a perfect spot here. I think he had just enough time last year and enough experience in the offense to take it over and really get a feel for what he wanted to do. And certainly there were some nuances that were different. I'm sure Josh and some of the players would be able to tell you more specifically about what they noticed about Joe rather than Ken. So I think now with an entire offseason, with a mindset and a head coach down the line of Sean McDermott, I'm sure Sean was talking to Joe a lot in the offseason about, hey, okay, now you got to think about this, and I didn't like this, and I just, going through how Sean envisions the offense could evolve, where Joe Brady could take it, plus the unknowns of the new players and the turnover that you're going to get. I think Joe Brady's got a real opportunity here to do some special things, particularly with this quarterback.
Mitch Morse, another guy that the Bills lost this offseason, and I don't know that people really realize, and again, Josh would be able to explain this probably best, but the relationship a center has with the quarterback, that's, it's not as easy as just putting another body in there and hiking the ball. There's more to that chemistry. What are your thoughts on them moving on from Mitch and now Josh I know there's familiar faces, but it's a little different when it's not your main guy.
Right, yeah, and it's an adjustment a lot of quarterbacks have to make at some point in their career. Quarterbacks usually tend to play longer than the centers that they're under. So, yeah, Mitch was a great guy. He was a great center for this team. Got Josh through some some real issues. And I think one of the things about a center and a quarterback relationship is the quarterback will want to do things with the offense. When he does it, the center has to know enough about the offense to be able to check the protection himself. The quarterback will do it a lot, but the center also has a say in saying what we can do and what we can't do and what we should do and what we shouldn't do. Back in the era, Jim Kelly and Kent Hull illustrated that beautifully. They were one and the same, and Jim trusted him a lot to where Kent could shake the quarterback off, say, we're not running that play, and Jim would say, okay, and change it to something else. There's something about that relationship that's really important, because if they get that wrong, Josh has got a free rusher and he's going to get hit in the mouth. So that's how trust gets, earned. So you protect me even when I mess up, and I trust you with a lot. So and I'll listen to you. So that's. Yeah, Mitch Morse is a big void. I think it's an emotional void. X's and O's, I think guys can get that. But the reps and the trust and the rapport that could lead to plays being made that weren't there to be made, that's going to take some time.
In wrapping up here, one thing, too, I wanted to ask you is just in terms of, we talked about Diggs no longer being here, but something I think people have referenced in Diggs' departure is this is completely Josh Allen's team now, right? And I don't know it wasn't before, because I think for a few years at least it's been Josh Allen's team. But when you lose maybe a marquee player like that, there's really no one else to, quote, hide behind. So at this point, do you feel like, obviously it seems Josh is ready for that challenge, but what are your thoughts on kind of him just, this is Josh Allen's team now?
Yeah, there's no question. It's been Josh's team for a minute here. Certainly there are other quality players, high-level players. Vaughn is still a part of this team. Vaughn is always going to be a mentor to the younger guys and have a voice that has real credibility no matter what you're talking about in the locker room. So guys like that are important to have in. It can be Josh Allen's team, but I'm pretty sure when you're a smart leader and stuff, you also have guys that you trust and who can hold you accountable. So if you're above everybody on the team and nobody can tell you that, hey, you might want to tone that down a little bit, sometimes that can be a problem. So you need to have leaders on your team who work really hard, set the standard for effort and accountability, and also are not above their teammates. When you've got guys like that, you can have as many as you want. And the more you have, the more that you have, the better. And that fosters that chemistry that can elevate a team to be more than the sum of its parts.
So last question kind of transitions perfectly there. What are your expectations for this team? Because right now it feels as maybe they're back to kind of being the underdogs, in the sense that, this was a weird year with the salary cap and they weren't able to go out and spend maybe the way some other teams were. And I've heard rebuilding year or the off year in between when they're going to be competitive, because next year the cap opens back up. Do you project any sort of step back this year, or what are your thoughts on the team?
No. Offensively, they're going to be a wagon. They're going to be hard to beat. And defensively, while there may be some new faces and maybe a sputtering start on that side of the ball, I don't know if there will be or whether they'll come out of the blocks fast. But offensively, there should be no drop-off. I have fully expect the wide receiver room, the tight end room, the running back room to support Josh extremely well, and their offensive line may be even better than it was a year ago. And last year, they had 5 guys who played 95% of all the snaps. The only time one of them came out was when Deion Dawkins came out of the Pittsburgh game for one drive. Otherwise, all 5 guys played every snap. Their offensive line may be better and more and deeper this year. Maybe it'll never be tested. So offensively, they're good to go. They're a wagon. Defensively, we'll see. It's time for Rousseau and Epinesa, Ed Oliver, Vaughn, Matt Milano get back on the field, and certainly Terrell Bernard is going to be a big part of what goes forward. And he really played well last year. Dorian Williams is a huge athlete who's a great asset to the team, who is going to fight to get on the field this year because of his athleticism. So, and with the athleticism in the back end now, instead of the experience and the wile and guile of the back end, now you've got athleticism and youth. So we'll see about the defensive side of the ball. I think with this head coach and Bobby Babich, the new defensive coordinator, I have every reason to believe they're going to ascend. But offensively, there should be absolutely no difference.
Well, Steve, thank you as always for joining us here at the 2024 Team Western Shoot. I'm Brad Gelber for Steve Tasker. We'll see you soon.